The smell of charcoal and sizzling ribs filled the backyard, thick and familiar, like every other summer gathering we'd had in that house. Kids shrieked near the sprinkler, chasing bubbles that popped before they could catch them. Dean's wife, Melanie, sipped sangria under the canopy with the other real adults all manicured and laughing like they'd done something brave just by showing up. Meanwhile, I was standing barefoot on scorched grass, flipping burgers with one hand, holding a paper towel to my niece, Ava's scraped knee, with the other. My shirt clung to my back from the heat and the humidity, but no one noticed. That was the point. No one ever noticed. It wasn't like I hadn't tried to matter. I stayed after Mom's surgery, after Dad's fall, after Dean's wife left for the first time and he swore he was overwhelmed. I showed up, kept the house from falling apart, raised his kids like they were my own, and I never asked for anything in return except a little kindness. Maybe a thank you. Maybe a corner of the backyard to sit and breathe. I poured lemonade into sticky plastic cups and passed them down the table. Levi wanted more ice. Sophie didn't want pulp. Ava had mustard on her fingers and a popsicle stain on her chin. And Melanie just waved her hand at me without making eye contact. "Can you grab more napkins, Emily?" she asked. Not even a please. I smiled like I always did. Sure. My name is Emily Harper. I'm 32 years old, and I've spent most of my life cleaning up after people who pretended I didn't exist. My family used to call me the responsible one. That's code for the one who can be used without guilt. I stayed behind when everyone else left, picked up every piece they dropped, and folded myself so small I thought I'd disappear. By the time Dean stood up to make a toast, I had already served the food, cleaned the table once, and rescued a flaming marshmallow from setting the deck on fire. I was wiping grease off my hands when I heard his voice. "To family," he said, raising his glass. "And to the help who keeps it all running." There was a pause. Not awkward, not shocked. Just a small, rippling silence before someone chuckled. Then another. Dean turned toward me. His smile was too smooth. "Really, Em, we don't know what we'd do without you." Then he added like a punchline whispered across a quiet room. "You were just hired hands. Get out of our lives." He said it like a joke, but he looked straight at me, dead in the eyes, like he meant it. And the worst part, everyone laughed. Not because it was funny, but because no one wanted to be the one to say, it wasn't. I felt something sharp slide beneath my ribs. I swallowed hard. I think I even smiled. That's what I'd trained myself to do. Smile through the ache. Keep moving. Don't make it awkward. Don't cause trouble. But something cracked. It didn't make a sound, but I felt it. Deep, quiet, final. Ava tugged at my hand, still sticky. "Aunt Em, you okay?" I nodded, crouched down, and wiped her mouth clean. "I'm fine, sweetheart." But I wasn't. Later that evening, after the grill cooled and the sun melted behind the trees, I stood in the laundry room scrubbing ketchup out of a polo shirt that wasn't mine. Dean's voice echoed in my head, "just hired hands," and I realized something. He didn't see me as a sister. Maybe he never had. That night, as they all watched fireworks from lawn chairs and laughed about old high school stories I wasn't a part of, I sat in the upstairs hallway folding towels. I stared at the framed photos on the wall, Sophia's graduation, Dean's wedding, the family trip to Yellowstone. I wasn't in most of them, and where I did appear, I was always blurry, off to the side, hands full, eyes tired. The truth had been there all along. I just hadn't wanted to believe it. You were just hired hands. That wasn't a joke. That was a sentence. And I'd been serving time for years. But not anymore. Because while they laughed and toasted and sipped wine I'd poured, I sat on the floor and opened an old envelope I'd found wedged behind the kitchen cabinet. The return address said Margaret Harper, my mother's sister, a woman my parents said was selfish, difficult, not real family. Inside was a yellowed card with one sentence. "If you ever need peace, come. There's always tea and flowers waiting." I held it like a lifeline. Dean thought he could cast me out like a broken tool, but he had no idea what I was capable of building once I stopped asking for permission. Let them toast to family. I was about to show them what a woman with nothing left could become. The thing about getting stuck is that it never happens all at once. You don't wake up one morning and realize you've handed your life over. It happens in pieces, small, quiet concessions that don't seem like much until you look around and realize there's nothing left that's yours. That was me, after Mom died. She passed on a Tuesday in late September. I remember because the sunflowers in the backyard had just started to droop, and the hospice nurse left a sympathy card on the kitchen counter next to the dishes I hadn't gotten to. Dean arrived the next morning with a fresh haircut, a crisp navy shirt and no casserole, just a laptop and a look that said we needed to get ahead of things. Dad had passed 6 months earlier, a heart attack. Quick, cruel, and as unresolved as the arguments we never finished. With both parents gone, the weight of everything fell to the two of us, or more precisely, to me. Dean sat at the kitchen table while I stood at the sink scrubbing the same mug over and over. "We should talk about the house," he said, fingers already clicking away. "I've got a friend who helped me set up a family trust. Real clean, real simple. Keeps everything from getting messy with probate." He looked up smiling like he was doing me a favor. "It'll be in both our names, but I'll manage the paperwork. You know, make it easier." I was exhausted. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours straight in weeks. I'd been the one managing medications bathing Mom when she couldn't stand making her smoothies she barely drank. I didn't ask for help. Dean visited when it was convenient. Always with good intentions and expensive coffee, but never long enough to get his hands dirty. He slid the packet of papers across the table like it was nothing. This way we both have a stake in the house. Long term. No drama. Just sign here. I didn't read all of it, I'll admit that now. I scanned the headers, the names, the dates. It looked official, but not alarming, and I was too tired to be suspicious. So I signed. That was the day I gave away something I didn't fully understand. The temporary arrangement started 2 weeks later. Melanie called first. Her voice was honeyed with concern. "Dean said you might need some company, and the kids, well, it might be nice for them to be in a real home while we renovate. Just for a month or two, you won't even notice us." They moved in on a Sunday. By Thursday, I was sleeping in the attic. Melanie said the kids needed space. "You know how sensitive Sophie is?" She explained, ushering me past the bedroom I used to call mine. I stared at the bunk beds, the glittery name tags taped to the door. Levi had drawn a family tree in crayon on the wall. My name wasn't on it. At first I told myself it was temporary, that I was being kind, that I was doing what Mom would have wanted, keeping family together. But days turned into weeks, and weeks blurred into months. I made breakfast before work, did the laundry after. Ava spilled juice on the couch, and I was the one scrubbing it out. Melanie didn't lift a finger unless it was to scroll her phone or adjust a yoga strap. Dean started bringing clients over. "It's a great setup," he told them, gesturing around the living room I'd painted. "Old family home, full of history. We're just here while we decide what to do with it long term." He never mentioned me. And still, I didn't push back. I told myself it was fine, that I was useful. That usefulness meant something. I believed deep down that if I just kept giving, they'd eventually see me. One night, Melanie had friends over for wine and candles, her words, not mine. I had just finished folding a load of towels when I overheard her say, "She's like a live-in helper." Honestly, I don't know how she manages it all. I'd lose my mind. The way she said it wasn't cruel, just casual, like I was furniture. Something helpful, but hollow. I stood there in the hallway, towel in hand, heart thudding like I'd been slapped. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pack up and vanish, but I didn't. I went back to the laundry room, added lavender softener, and started the next load. I don't know exactly when I stopped being Emily Harper's sister, daughter woman with plans. Somewhere in that house, I became a function. The one who remembered birthdays, the one who ironed shirts, the one who stayed quiet so everyone else could speak louder. It didn't feel like a fall. It felt like erosion, slow, invisible, and all-consuming. And by the time Dean raised his glass that summer afternoon and called me just hired hands, I realized he wasn't betraying me. He was simply naming the role I'd agreed to play, but what he didn't know, what none of them knew, is that I'd finally heard him. And this time, I was done listening. The first thing I noticed was the mail. It stopped coming, not all at once, but gradually, like a faucet losing pressure. At first I thought it was the holidays clogging up the system. Then I blamed the neighbor's dog who had a habit of tipping over mailboxes for fun. But By January, I realized I hadn't seen a bank statement utility bill or even a grocery circular addressed to me in over 6 weeks. I went to the post office to check. The clerk, a thin woman with tight braids and sharp eyes, tapped at her computer and frowned. "You put in a forwarding request?" she asked. "No," I said. "Why?" She tilted the screen toward me. "Looks like someone did. All your mail's being redirected to a P.O. box in Sandy Springs." Sandy Springs? That's where Dean's new office was. I stood there blinking at the screen heart, suddenly too big for my chest. "Can I see who filed it?" "Sorry," she said, shrugging. "Privacy laws." I walked back to the car and sat there for a long time, keys in my hand, mind spinning. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was temporary. Maybe it was Melanie. She always had some new subscription service that required a dozen addresses. I tried to rationalize it. That was my first instinct, make myself small enough to make it okay. Later that night, I checked my bank account. It took 3 tries to log in. The password had been changed. When I finally got in, I saw 2 months of inactivity. No deposits, no auto-pays. I hadn't gotten a single alert. The power bill, which I always paid, was now linked to an unfamiliar name. Water, 2, gas, internet. All listed under Dean Harper. I wanted to believe it was an oversight, that they were trying to simplify things, that it wasn't about erasing me, it was just logistics. But when I went into the attic to pull out the envelope with the house paperwork, the one Dean had me sign after Mom passed, I couldn't find it. The fireproof lockbox I kept under the floorboard was gone. A few days later, I confronted Dean. He was sitting at the breakfast table, laptop, open kids, already at school, Melanie out getting a facial. I stood there with my arms crossed, the silence stretching between us like a rope, ready to snap. "Did you forward my mail?" He didn't look up. "Melanie might have, to make things easier. I checked the records. It went to your P.O. box." He paused, lifted his mug, took a slow sip. "You're overthinking it, Em." I also checked the deed. That got his attention. His jaw tightened. "What about it? I'm not on it anymore." He looked at me, then really looked at me, and the mask slipped just a little. "That's because you signed it over. Remember, we agreed I'd manage the property. You didn't want the responsibility." "No," I said quietly. "I signed a shared trust document, not a quitclaim deed, not a full transfer." Dean shrugged, but his voice grew colder. "Same difference. You weren't using it, and I was already paying the mortgage. You used my signature." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're imagining things?" That's when I realized I had nothing in writing. No copy, no paper trail, just a foggy memory and a gut full of dread. That night, I opened my old email account, the one I barely used anymore, and started digging. I searched every folder, every attachment, every buried PDF, and there it was, a blurry scan of the original paperwork Dean had emailed me to review. Attached to the message, "Just sign and send back. I'll take care of the rest." I compared the signature on the deed to the one I found. Mine was loopy and uneven. The one on the deed was stiff, too neat, like someone had copied it from a check. I forwarded the documents to Mia, an old college friend who'd gone to law school and now worked contracts for a mid-sized firm in Nashville. I didn't give her context, just asked her to look it over. She called me 30 minutes later. "Emily," she said, voice clipped, "this looks bad. The signatures don't match. And the notary, that's a fake stamp. If this wasn't authorized, it's borderline fraud." "Can I fight it?" I asked. "You'd have a case," she said. "But you'll need more than suspicion. You'll need intent. Proof he did this knowingly." I sat at the kitchen table, phone pressed to my ear, trying to breathe around the knowledge that I'd been robbed, not just of paper and property, but of presence. I wasn't just disappearing, I was being erased. I stared out the window. The backyard lights were on. Melanie was sipping white wine on the patio, laughing into her phone. She wore my mother's old sweater, the one she used to drape across her shoulders for spring garden parties. It looked out of place on Melanie, too warm, too lived in for someone like her. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't about family. It never had been. They didn't want me. They just wanted what I'd kept running, so they took it, silently, efficiently. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt furious. It happened on a Wednesday. Midweek, mid-morning, mid-load of laundry. I was crouched in front of the washer, pulling damp towels from the drum when the world shifted sideways. At first, I thought I'd just stood up too fast. The floor tilted under me and my knees buckled. My hands reached for the shelf, but my grip failed. A bottle of detergent hit the ground and burst like a cheap grenade blue liquid pooling across the tile. Then everything went dark. When I came to, my cheek was pressed against cold linoleum and my body felt like it had been unplugged from itself. No one was around. No one had heard the fall. I don't know how long I lay there, eyes half open, heart hammering in my throat. Eventually, I dragged myself to sitting palms raw against the floor. My legs trembled, my arms ached. It took me 20 minutes to crawl upstairs and another 10 just to call someone. I didn't dial Dean, I called an Uber. The urgent care clinic smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. The nurse took one look at me and called in a neurologist. Tests were scheduled. Blood drawn, MRIs, muscle reflex exams. The doctor was a man in his late 40s with kind eyes and a clipboard he rarely looked away from. After 2 appointments, he sat me down in a windowless exam room and gave me a name for what was happening. Multiple sclerosis. Early onset, progressive. The words dropped like bricks. I didn't ask many questions. I just nodded as he explained inflammation lesions mobility. "There's no cure," he said, gently. But with management and support, I stopped listening after no cure. I took the bus home that day, the windows fogged from the rain. My body felt foreign like a machine on low battery. The driver helped me off at the stop near the house, and I limped the rest of the way with my sweatshirt pulled tight around my arms. When I stepped through the front door, Dean was sitting on the couch watching ESPN with a beer in hand. Melanie wasn't home. "You okay?" he asked, not looking up. "I need to talk to you," I said, and the sound of my voice startled even me. He muted the TV. "What now?" I sat down slowly, bones aching from the walk. "I have MS." He turned toward me, blinking. "What multiple sclerosis? Early onset. I've probably had symptoms for years, but it's progressing fast." Dean exhaled, leaned back, and scratched his jaw. "So what does that mean?" "It means I can't do what I used to do. Laundry, cooking, driving. Some days I won't even be able to walk without help." For a moment there was silence. Then he stood up, walked to the kitchen, and came back with a bottle of water. He handed it to me like a truce. "I mean, that's rough, Em." I nodded, hoping foolishly for something more. Some offer, some sign he'd step up now, but then he said it. "This house isn't really built for that kind of thing. You need assisted care, professional help, somewhere that can handle what's coming." He said it gently, like someone discussing what to do with a broken lamp. I didn't respond. I didn't cry. I just stood, took the water bottle with me, and walked upstairs. My legs throbbed the whole way. 3 days later, they came. Movers, 3 of them, polite, efficient, wearing matching shirts. I opened the door in my slippers, confused. The tallest one handed me an envelope. Inside, a letter from a property management firm. Notice of termination of occupancy. Effective immediately. Dean had filed it as tenant eviction. He'd listed me as a non-family occupant, no legal rights, no lease, no defense. They packed my things in boxes I hadn't labeled, my books, my journals, my mother's porcelain birds now rattling in a dish towel. I stood in the driveway with trembling hands while Ava cried and Sophie hid behind the curtains upstairs. Melanie didn't come outside. Dean watched from the porch, arms crossed. He didn't say a word. Not then. Not even when I turned to him and said quietly, "You've made your point." He blinked once, then went back inside. That night, I checked into a motel off the freeway. It smelled like bleach and hopelessness. I lay on a mattress that sank in the middle and stared at the water-stained ceiling. I had $480 in my bank account, a diagnosis I couldn't afford to treat, and a body that didn't feel like mine anymore. I thought about all the things I'd given them, years money care silence. I thought about the towel I folded that morning, the sandwich I cut for Ava's lunch. I thought about the deed, the forged signature, the missing mail. And then I thought about the card. Tucked deep in my bag was a letter I hadn't looked at since that night after the barbecue. Aunt Margaret's handwriting, neat and slanted. "If you ever need peace, come." There's always tea and flowers waiting. I pressed it to my chest like a compass. Maybe it was time. The motel room was dim and quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't soothe but suffocates. I sat on the edge of the bed with a trash bag full of clothes at my feet and the hum of the mini fridge buzzing behind me like a fly that wouldn't die. Outside, trucks groaned down the freeway and headlights flickered through the blinds. It had been 2 days since the movers packed my life into cardboard. 2 days since Dean erased the last thread tying me to the only home I'd ever known. My body ached. My hands were slow, my legs stiff, but what hurt most was something deeper. Something hollowed out and echoing. I opened the bag again this time, not to take anything out, just to touch what I had left. A denim jacket, a paperback novel with the spine cracked in half, a box of tea I used to make when Ava was sick, and then, at the very bottom, crumpled and forgotten, was a small envelope. Pale yellow, no return address. The handwriting on the front was slanted and looping. Emily? It stopped me cold. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it as if the paper might disintegrate from the weight of memory. Inside was a folded card with a painted field of marigolds and a single line in the center. If you ever need peace, come. There's always tea and flowers waiting. Margaret Harper, my mother's older sister, the woman no one talked about. Growing up, she was a ghostly figure referenced only in tight-lipped phrases. She made her choices. She walked away from family. Selfish. I'd never met her. Not really. She'd sent a birthday card once when I was 10, but Mom ripped it up before I could read it, and yet she'd written this. Not long ago. The envelope wasn't faded. The ink hadn't run. It had been waiting, just like she had. I read the line again and again as if it might change, as if it might sprout more words explaining what kind of peace she meant or whether flowers could actually fix a life. But it didn't. It was simple, quiet, unassuming. Still, it felt like a door. I folded the card and tucked it into my inside jacket pocket. Then I stood, grabbed the trash bag, and walked out of the motel without looking back. At the bus station, I paid cash for a one-way ticket to Tennessee. I didn't know the exact town, just the name of a road I'd Googled in a blur, Crooked Hill Lane. The woman at the counter raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She handed me a printed slip and told me it'd be a 6-hour ride with one stop halfway through. The waiting area smelled like coffee and disinfectant. I sat under a flickering overhead light with my hands tucked between my knees and tried not to think. When the bus arrived, I climbed the steps slowly, my body protesting the movement. I chose a window seat near the back, pressed my forehead to the glass, and closed my eyes as the city slid past. The highways blurred into trees and the trees into hills. Somewhere along the way, the tight coil in my chest began to loosen. Not release, not relief, just a loosening. A fraying at the edge of the constant fight or freeze that had lived in my ribcage for years. I thought about what I might find when I got there. An old house, a garden maybe, a woman with silver hair and the same sharp eyes as my mother, but none of her cruelty. Or maybe I'd find nothing, just another closed door, but even that felt better than sitting still. Somewhere around mile marker 213, I reached into my pocket and touched the card again. I imagined Margaret in a kitchen filled with the scent of lemon balm and soil. I pictured a porch swing and chipped mugs. I didn't know if any of it was real, but for the first time in weeks, I wanted something. Not vengeance, not answers, just something small. Peace, tea, flowers. When the bus pulled off the main highway and onto a winding 2-lane road, the landscape began to shift. Hills rose gently on either side, and wildflowers spilled across the ditches in gold and violet. I pressed my hand to the window, my breath fogging the glass. We passed a hand-painted sign that read, "Crooked Hill, 2 miles." My fingers trembled as I clutched my bag and stood. At the next stop, the driver opened the door and I stepped down onto gravel and light and air that smelled different, cleaner, quieter, softer somehow. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew I had made the right choice. Because this time I wasn't running away, I was walking towards something. The gravel crackled beneath my shoes as I stepped off the bus and onto the dirt road that stretched toward a curve of trees. I had no map, just the vague memory of the address scribbled on the inside flap of Margaret's card. The morning sun was warm but gentle, and the air carried the faintest scent of herbs and dust. I walked slowly, clutching my bag tight, each step both a question and a decision. Around the bend, the land opened. A low wooden fence lined with climbing jasmine bordered the property, and behind it, rows of lavender and marigolds rolled like waves toward a pale blue cottage with a sagging porch. The shutters were open. Bees drifted lazily in and out of the blooms. Margaret stepped out before I even knocked. She wore a straw hat tilted back, and her silver hair was braided down her back like a cord of quiet strength. Her face was older than I remembered from a photograph I once saw, but her eyes held something familiar, like the part of my mother that had never made it to the surface. She didn't ask why I was there. She didn't ask what had happened. She just opened the screen door and said, "You look like you need sleep more than talk." I nodded once, my throat too tight to speak. She led me to a small guest room with wide windows and faded quilts that smelled of sun and lavender sachets. I set my bag down and sat on the edge of the bed. My body felt too heavy to hold upright. My hands trembled even as I tried to unzip my jacket. "You can rest," she said gently. "No one needs anything from you here." Those words hit harder than I expected. I don't remember lying down. I just remember the pillow being soft and the silence being absolute. Not empty, not tense, just still. I slept for almost 3 days. When I woke, the light was different, warmer, more golden. My body still ached, but not in the way it had in that motel bed. It ached like a shell softening. Margaret had left a tray beside me with a mug of tea, a slice of peach bread, and a folded note that simply read, "No rush." Eventually, I stepped outside. The garden was alive with color and movement, bees darting petals, swaying birds hopping from fence post to fence post. I stood on the porch and let the sun find my shoulders. For a moment, I imagined my old life had never happened. Margaret was in the field trimming a patch of lavender with quiet precision. She looked up, gave a nod, and kept working. No pressure, no performance, just an invitation to exist. The next morning, I asked if I could help. She handed me a watering can and pointed to a row of young rosemary along the back fence. "Try this row," she said. "They're thirsty, but delicate, like most things." I took the can with both hands and walked the length of the row. The first few pours went fine, though I could already feel the strain in my fingers. By the fourth plant, my grip faltered. The can slipped, crashed to the ground, and water spilled everywhere. I froze. My heart raced. My legs locked in place. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not violently, just came undone. I sank to my knees in the dirt, hands useless in my lap, and started to cry. Not soft tears, not graceful. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deeper than memory. I couldn't stop. I didn't even try. I don't know how long I knelt there, mud soaking into my jeans. Margaret didn't come rushing. She didn't hover or soothe. But eventually, I felt her kneel beside me. She placed one weathered hand over mine, light, steady, warm. "Your body's telling the truth," she said quietly. "It's just catching up to everything you carried." I nodded, still crying, because she was right. It wasn't just the spilled water. It was the weight of every moment I stayed silent. Every time I said yes when I meant no, every towel I folded, every dinner I made, every time I called it love when it was just obligation. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my shirt and looked at the soil. The rosemary plants were still rooted, still upright. Margaret stood slowly and offered her hand. "Come on. You don't have to fix anything today." I took her hand and let her pull me up. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had failed someone. I just felt like I was finally allowed to be broken. The next morning, I woke to the smell of melted wax and orange peel. It curled through the cottage like a ribbon, soft and warm, and pulled me toward the kitchen before I'd even opened my eyes fully. Margaret was at the stove, pouring golden liquid from a small metal pitcher into a row of mason jars lined up neatly on a towel. On the counter beside her was a tray of dried flower petals, lavender rose and marigold, and a small tin of labels she'd clearly cut by hand. She didn't look up when I entered, just nodded toward a chair. Sit. There's tea. I poured myself a cup and sat watching the way her hands moved, steady, deliberate, sure. I envied that. I hadn't felt sure of anything in years. After a while, she glanced at me. You ever make candles? I shook my head. I didn't exactly grow up with craft days. She smiled, not unkindly. Well, we're not crafting. We're preserving light. She said it so plainly, I almost laughed. But something about the way she moved, the care she gave to something as simple as wax made me stay quiet. She showed me how to set the wicks, how to measure the oils, how to stir slowly without bubbling the surface. It's not about perfection, she said. It's about memory. These petals were alive once, now they hold scent color feeling. That's worth something. We made 6 jars that day. 4 were usable. The other 2 cracked when I misjudged the cooling time. Margaret didn't scold me. She didn't even flinch. She just handed me more jars and said, try again tomorrow. In the afternoons, she worked outside trimming marigolds and coaxing bees away from the sunflowers with little saucers of water and sugar. I'd sit on the porch steps and watch hands resting on my knees, still stiff from the morning's efforts. One golden hour when the light hit the field just right and turned everything into honey, I pulled out my phone. I hadn't opened the camera app in weeks, maybe longer. I filmed Margaret from behind her braid, swaying as she leaned into a row of marigolds. She hummed under her breath, completely unaware of the lens. The flowers glowed in the light like they were humming too. It wasn't planned. It wasn't edited. It was 38 seconds of something I couldn't name but didn't want to lose. That night, I uploaded it to a new Instagram account I created on Impulse Harper's Bloom. I chose the name without thinking too hard. Harper had always been my last name, but now it felt like a seed, something small that might grow if given the chance. The caption was simple. Rooted, not trapped. I didn't expect anything. I had 23 followers, mostly bots and the occasional candle-making account I'd followed back. I closed the app, made myself a cup of peppermint tea, and went to bed without checking it again. By morning, the video had over 12,000 views. I blinked at the screen. The comments were filled with heart emojis, quiet gratitude, and one line that stuck out from a user named Rest for Women. I haven't felt peace in months. I watched this twice, thank you. I clicked the username. She was a therapist based in Asheville. She'd reposted the video with the caption, for any woman who has given more than she had. Let this be your breath today. By lunch, the video had been shared on 3 mental health pages and 2 gardening blogs. I'd received a message from a woman in Ohio who said the sound of the bees reminded her of her grandmother's porch. Another woman from Oregon sent a photo of her own marigold patch and wrote, "You reminded me to go outside today." I showed Margaret the video after dinner. She watched quietly, then shrugged. Guess those old flowers still have some light left in them. I turned to her. People loved it. They said it helped them feel calm. Margaret poured 2 mugs of tea and handed one to me. Maybe that's your thing, Em. Not being the helper, not being the fixer, just being a presence. I sat with that. A presence, not a worker, not an errand runner, not invisible, not erased. Present. That night, I lay in bed with the window open and the scent of lemon balm drifting in. My hands ached, but in a new way, a way that reminded me they were still mine. My body wasn't fully cooperating, but it wasn't done. Neither was I. Harper's Bloom had started as a name. Now it was a space. A small one, sure, but real. Not for labor, not for guilt, but for something else. Something that, for the first time in a long time, felt like mine. It started with a folder, a thick, weathered one with a blue elastic band around it and faint handwriting across the front. Harper. Oak Ridge. Margaret pulled it from the back of a cabinet while looking for a spare set of garden gloves. Meant to give this to you sooner, she said, as if it were no more urgent than a casserole recipe, but you needed rest first. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and took it, the weight of it unfamiliar but oddly grounding. Inside, the papers were crisp, despite their age copies of property records, a handwritten letter, and tucked in the middle, A notarized document with my name printed clearly across the top: irrevocable land trust. 50% beneficiary Emily R. Harper. I stared at it for a long moment, unsure what I was seeing. What is this? Margaret poured herself a glass of iced tea and sat across from me. It's what I did after your mother told me she was putting the house in Dean's name. I looked up. Wait, you knew? She nodded. She called me when your father passed. Wanted money to help cover funeral costs. Said they were streamlining the estate. Said you'd be taken care of. I didn't believe her. I set the folder down. Why would she lie? Margaret gave a thin smile, the kind that comes from living too many years with truths that don't go anywhere. Because Patricia always thought legacy was something you controlled, and because she knew you wouldn't fight her. You were raised to believe sacrifice made you good. I sat back, hands trembling slightly. The document was dated just 2 months after Dad's funeral. You set this up behind her back. She didn't leave me much choice, she said. And frankly, I didn't trust Dean either. He was already sniffing around the insurance payout like it was a family business. She sipped her tea. I figured if the house ever got sold or if you were ever pushed out, you deserved a legal foothold. You'd paid for half of it already, whether they acknowledged it or not. I pressed my palms flat to the table. The implications settled over me like dust. This is real, legally binding. I worked with an attorney in Nashville, quietly. She gestured to the envelope tucked at the back of the folder. His name's on the last page. Still practices, last I heard. I opened the envelope. A business card slid out, simple and unassuming: Carson Hale, estate and property law. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. I thought of every time Dean told me I had no claim. Every time he called me just hired hands. Every time my mother had reminded me to be grateful, to stay quiet, to not make things messy. But this changed everything. You did this. For me, Margaret shrugged. You were the only one who called when your dad was in the hospital. The only one who remembered my birthday after I moved away. You think I forgot that? Tears burned behind my eyes, but I blinked them back. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because you weren't ready to use it. And because if I'd handed it to you when you were still trying to earn their love, you would have given it right back. She wasn't wrong. I held the document in my hands like it might dissolve. My name. In ink. In permanence. On the house I'd been erased from. I think it's time you call that lawyer, she said softly. I nodded. That afternoon, I sat on the porch with my phone in one hand and the trust document in the other. The wind tugged at the edge of my sweater, and somewhere nearby, bees buzzed over the rosemary bush. Carson Hale answered on the second ring. His voice was low and unhurried, with the faintest trace of rural Tennessee. I introduced myself, told him who had set up the trust, and asked if he had time to talk. He remembered Margaret immediately. Smart woman, he said. One of the few clients who asked all the right questions. You're her niece. Yes, I said, and apparently the co-owner of a house I was kicked out of. He didn't laugh, just said, then we've got work to do. We spoke for an hour. He asked for scans of the documents, any record I had of financial contributions, any proof of tenancy. I had plenty. Utilities in my name for years. Bank transfers for home repairs. Even photos of me repainting the garage with Dean in the background sipping lemonade. When I hung up, my fingers were shaking, but not from fear, from something else. Certainty. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving someone else's choices. I was preparing to challenge them with paperwork, with truth, with a name no longer written in pencil. Emily Harper. Co-owner, not hired help. I was in the greenhouse when I saw his truck. Dust kicked up behind the tires like smoke, the kind that never signaled warmth. He pulled in slowly, the way people do when they're trying to look casual but are already calculating their next move. The kids were with him. Sophie, in the front seat, eyes glued to her phone. Levi and Ava in the back, both thinner than I remembered. It had been nearly 5 months. 5 months of silence, of no calls, no apologies, no how are you doing, just absence. And now, he was here unannounced, like it was still his right. I met them halfway down the path. Dean stepped out, sunglasses pushed up on his head, wearing a branded golf polo I knew he couldn't afford anymore. He said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We were just passing through, thought we'd stop in. Sophie barely glanced up. Levi didn't meet my eyes, but Ava ran straight toward me and hugged my waist. "We saw your video on You're Famous Now." I smiled and bent to hug her back. She smelled like road snacks and old fast food. "Not famous, sweetheart. Just growing something real." Margaret came out onto the porch, hands on hips, not saying a word. Her presence was enough. Dean gave a little nod in greeting, then turned his attention back to me. "Look," he began. "I know things got tense, but we're in a bit of a situation right now. My company restructured and the severance package wasn't what we expected. The apartment lease fell through. I was wondering if maybe temporarily we could stay here just for a bit, till things stabilize." His voice had the practiced ease of someone who'd said those words before. Not to me, never an apology, but to Banks bosses, maybe even his ex-wife. I let the moment hang. The kids stood awkwardly behind him, Sophie now shifting from foot to foot, Levi studying the gravel. Dean continued glancing toward the open barn and greenhouse behind me. "I saw your website. Looks like Harper's Bloom is doing really well. You've always been good at the quiet stuff. You know, never needed the spotlight." He meant it as praise. A backhanded one, the kind that implies you're only valuable when you stay in the background. I didn't answer right away. Just turned to the porch and called up Margaret. "Could you grab the envelope from the kitchen drawer? The one with Dean's name on it?" She raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask questions. 2 minutes later, she handed it down without a word. I held it out to him. He took it confused, tearing the seal with the same hands that once signed away my place in our family home. His eyes scanned the document. Eviction notice, retroactive claim, co-owner assertion backed by the trust, legal language, registered attorney signature at the bottom. Dean looked up, color draining from his face. "What is this?" "It's a reminder," I said evenly. "You live in the house I helped build. The house I paid to repair, cleaned, maintained, protected for years. And then you turned it into a cage. Now it's time for you to leave." He blinked. "You can't be serious. Where are the kids supposed to go?" I glanced at them, 3 children caught in a storm of adult decisions. "They're welcome to stay with me for the weekend. Get some food, some quiet, but the house, that's done. You crossed too many lines." His jaw clenched. "You'd really kick out your own brother." I kept my voice level. "You did it to me first. Remember." Behind me, Margaret stepped down from the porch, her presence steady. "You should go now, Dean." He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her voice, or maybe the way Levi had silently moved to stand beside me, stopped him. "Fine," he muttered. "But this isn't over." "No," I agreed. "It's just beginning." As his truck pulled away, Ava waved from the window. I waved back. I wasn't angry at them. They were passengers, not drivers. But I had finally taken the wheel. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the gravel road. Margaret touched my elbow gently. "You all right?" I nodded. "For the first time in a long time, yeah." She smiled. "Then let's get the guest room ready. Something tells me we'll have company tonight." That evening I cooked for the kids. Sophie helped with the salad. Levi sat close, finally talking again. Ava asked if we could pick flowers in the morning. And as I tucked them in, I realized something. Reclaiming a house is one thing. Reclaiming your voice? That's power. The summons came in a thick envelope hand-delivered by a courier who looked apologetic when he asked for my signature. The moment I saw Dean's name at the top, my hands curled into fists. Petition for sole control of the Harper property. His reasoning was as predictable as it was cruel mental instability, physical incapacity, and emotional volatility, inconsistent with the responsibilities of ownership. "He's calling you unstable," Carson said, sliding the petition across the table a few days later in his Nashville office. Based on the diagnosis and apparently a few cherry-picked social media posts, the man screenshotted a story you posted about burnout and grief and submitted it as evidence. I stared at the grainy printouts, my own words twisted into ammunition. "So this is what he's doing now. He's desperate," Carson said. "You served him an eviction notice. He didn't expect you to stand." The court date was set for 3 weeks later. Long enough to prepare. Long enough to dig. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch with Margaret, the stars stretched wide above the Tennessee sky. What if they believe him, I asked? What if they think I'm just angry and unstable like he claims Margaret sipped her tea calm as ever? Let them try. You've got truth, and paper, and a lawyer who actually reads contracts. Court was held in a modest county building in Georgia. Neutral jurisdiction given the property was split between two names and trust agreements. The courtroom smelled of varnished wood and old carpet. Dean arrived in a blazer a size too small, his lawyer a sleek, sharp-talking man with a silver pen and no eye contact. I wore navy, not black. I didn't want to mourn. I wanted to reclaim. Dean went first. His voice, as always, was calm, professional. He told the judge he was concerned about my ability to manage the property responsibly. He cited recent health episodes, emotional distance from the family, and a sudden pattern of erratic behavior, including removing his children from their home without consent. He made me sound like a bitter aunt with a vendetta. Then Carson stood. His voice didn't rise. He laid out the timeline Emily Harper, co-resident and partial owner, lived at the property for over 6 years after their parents' death. During that time, she maintained the home, cared for the children, and contributed financially and physically to the upkeep. He submitted photo statements from utility companies and copies of wire transfers from my account to repair contractors. Then he brought up the deed. The digital signature, Carson said, holding up a forensic document report, was time-stamped and traced to a device owned solely by Mr. Dean Harper. Not Ms. Harper. The login was not hers. The metadata proves forgery. Dean shifted in his seat. His lawyer scribbled something but didn't interrupt. Next came the financial records. Rent collected from his ex-wife's bank account, money paid to a family cohabitation agreement I had never signed. Carson explained how Dean had essentially monetized my labor and presence while presenting me as a dependent, not a contributor. Then Carson asked to admit one final piece of evidence, a series of texts Dean had accidentally sent to a shared family thread 2 years ago. One of them read, "She'll never leave. Too broke. Too tired. Too used to being needed. We've got a good setup." Dean's face turned the color of rusted brick. The judge was quiet for a long time after closing arguments. She asked one question, Ms. Harper, "What do you want from this proceeding?" I stood. My legs shook, but my voice didn't. I want legal confirmation of what's already morally true. I want to stop being erased. And I want to live without being manipulated under someone else's definition of family. The courtroom went still. The ruling came 15 minutes later. The trust was upheld. Dean's petition was denied. Full legal control of the Harper property was granted to me, citing evidence of fraud, labor exploitation, and malicious intent. The forged deed was nullified. Dean was ordered to vacate the home within 30 days. As we walked out, Dean didn't look at me. But I looked at him. Really looked. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. He had built a life on pretending I didn't matter, and now the structure cracked. Outside, Carson clapped me on the shoulder. "Justice is quiet," he said. "But when it lands, it sticks." I exhaled, not in triumph, in release. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation of truth, of space, of name. The mornings at the farm were different now. Not quieter, there was always something humming, bees near the echinacea, the steady clipping of shears, the rustle of muslin skirts brushing lavender rows, but there was a steadiness to it. A rhythm Emily hadn't known she needed. Harper's bloom had started as a whisper, a small act of survival, but now it breathed on its own. Emily stood at the edge of the marigold patch watching a new set of hands gather blossoms into a cedar crate. Anna, a single mom who'd answered a handwritten flyer at the co-op, had a way of moving through the fields like she'd grown up in them. She tied her curls back with a floral scarf and worked with precision, as though each stem she snipped was a stitch in something she was mending. Her daughter was in school during the day, and Anna said this place felt like the first thing she'd done in years that was hers. Michael arrived 2 weeks after Anna. 29 with sunburned forearms and a degree in agronomy. He never got to finish pandemic layoffs, family debts, too many odd jobs. He'd shown up with a portfolio of small farm layouts and a question. Are you open to raised beds near the apiary? They'd improve runoff and attract pollinators. Emily had nodded. She didn't need to explain legacy here. These two already knew what it meant to rebuild from scraps. They worked part-time, flexible hours, no clocks on the wall, just sun and season. Emily paid them fair wages, shared meals, and gave them title credits on every batch of herbal oil or candle that went online. Harper's Bloom wasn't a nonprofit or a charity. It was a business, but more than that, it was a haven. A soft landing for people whose value had been measured too long in silence and sacrifice. It started small Instagram reels of Michael teaching compost, layering Anna demonstrating how to infuse calendula into beeswax. Orders picked up. Then a post from a mid-sized wellness influencer tagged them. There's something different here. Not just aesthetic soulful, like healing with dirt and light. The post went semi-viral. Emails flooded in. Not just with purchases, but with stories. I haven't spoken to my sister in 10 years. Watching your video made me think about who I used to be. I left an emotionally abusive marriage last month. Your candles are the first things I've bought for my new apartment. My daughter saw your clip and asked if we could grow flowers together. I cried in the kitchen. Emily printed those notes and pinned them to a corkboard in the drying shed. Not as proof of success, but as reminders. That visibility didn't have to be loud to be real. One afternoon, Anna paused while bottling tinctures. You know, she said, I don't think I ever believed in starting over. Not really. I thought I'd just limp along until my kid was grown. But this... She gestured at the shelves, the sunlight catching on labeled jars and hanging bundles. This feels like I'm planting something again. Emily smiled. We all are. Sometimes Margaret would watch from the porch coffee and hand eyes soft. She didn't need to be involved in the day-to-day anymore. Emily was more than capable. Still, her presence remained a kind of anchor, quiet and constant. She never said, I told you so. She didn't have to. By late summer, Harper's Bloom began offering weekend workshops, herbal salves, flower pressing, even a beginner's gardening class taught by Michael. The guests weren't influencers or socialites. They were burned-out teachers, widows, caretakers, single moms, women trying to unlearn the idea that rest was earned only after everyone else was full. They came for the flowers, but stayed for something else, space, permission, each other. And one afternoon, as Emily stood under the trellis watching a class of 6 women quietly layer soil and compost, she felt it settle in her chest. Not relief exactly, but rootedness. A different kind of legacy. Not the kind that's inherited. The kind that's built, chosen, claimed, and this time, hers. The email came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon tucked between a shipping confirmation for dried chamomile bundles and a customer inquiry about soy wax refills. The subject line read, Only, I'm sorry. The sender, Sophia Harper. Emily stared at it for a moment, her hand hovering over the trackpad. Then she clicked. It was short. No flowery explanations, no demands for connection. Just 5 lines. Emily, I left them. I'm in California now. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry for watching, for staying silent, for pretending it wasn't happening. You didn't deserve any of it. Sophia, no sign-off, no emoji, just truth, plain and trembling. Emily leaned back in her chair. Outside, the marigolds bent under late summer wind. Anna was laughing with Michael near the fence line, trying to coax a stubborn wheelbarrow up the slope. Life was going on exactly as it should. She didn't reply. Instead, she clicked the little star icon and moved the message into a folder she'd labeled Keep, the same one that held Margaret's original letter, her deed documents, and the screenshots from that long-ago court case. Not because she planned to revisit it, but because some things deserved to be seen, not erased. Later that evening, as the sun sank behind the barn, casting everything in honey-colored light, Emily sat with Margaret on the porch swing. It had become their ritual tea silence and the occasional sentence that hung heavier than whole conversations. She wrote, Emily said, eyes fixed on the horizon. Sophia said she left them. Margaret didn't ask who them meant. She simply nodded. And I didn't respond. That's allowed. Emily exhaled slowly. Part of me wanted to. Not to start anything, just I don't know. Maybe to say I heard her. You did hear her? Margaret said, her voice low and even. You just don't owe her your peace. They sat quietly for a while, the cicadas beginning their dusk chorus. Then Margaret added, Forgiveness isn't letting them back in. It's letting yourself live without their weight. Emily looked down at her hands. The same hands that once sorted Dean's bills folded. His children's laundry prepped meals she never got to eat hot. The same hands that had carried too much emotionally, physically, legally. And now they planted. They poured wax, they held cups of tea and trimmed stems and built new things day by day without apology. I thought forgiveness was this big moment, Emily said. Some dramatic confrontation or tearful reconciliation, but now I think maybe it's just not reacting, not spiraling, just acknowledging and continuing. Margaret smiled. That's more honest than most therapists charge $200 an hour to say. Emily chuckled, then fell quiet again. I used to believe healing looked like going back, making it better, earning my place again. But now, she paused, choosing her words. Now I think healing is just building a life where that apology doesn't change anything. Exactly, Margaret said. And you've built it. The swing creaked softly beneath them. Out in the yard, Anna's daughter had joined the others, skipping barefoot between the rows. Someone had hung string lights around the oak tree. Someone had left a basket of fresh rosemary on the step. This wasn't a fairy tale, it wasn't neat. Sophia's email wouldn't erase years of silence. Dean's eviction wouldn't undo the betrayal, the scars weren't invisible, but they weren't open wounds anymore. And that Emily realized was enough. She didn't need to forgive them with her words. She'd already done it with her life. The old feed shop at the edge of the county line had sat empty for years, flaking paint, leaning porch, a for lease sign fading under layers of pollen and rust. Emily passed it every time she drove the delivery route, and one day, without really planning it, she pulled over. The keys arrived 2 weeks later. Anna cried when she saw the lease signed in Emily's name. They didn't renovate much, just cleaned, scrubbed, and let the charm show through. Michael built a wooden sign that read Harper's Bloom in hand-burned lettering, and Anna hung sprigs of dried sage over the doorway. Shelves filled quickly beeswax candles, salves, seed packets, herbal teas, bundles tied in rough twine with tags that read, Made with rest. Meant for rest. Emily brought in the ledger books each morning and restocked the lavender by the window where sunlight pooled like honey. Customers trickled in locals, weekenders, women passing through with tired eyes and curious hands. One said, My sister told me to come here. She said it changed her life. Another asked if they could host grief circles in the back room. Emily said yes to both. The store wasn't flashy, no marketing budget, no grand opening, just a screen door that creaked when you entered and the scent of calendula and rosemary in the air. But the energy shifted the day the school bus pulled up out front. It wasn't a field trip, not officially, just a teacher who brought her niece after hearing about the shop online. The girl had soft brown curls and scabbed knees. She moved through the space like it was a forest, wide-eyed, delicate. She didn't say much at first, just hovered near the herb jars, watched Emily arrange eucalyptus on the back counter. Then, without warning, she walked up and reached into her canvas pocket. She pulled out a marigold, its stem still damp petals, vibrant and frilled with orange fire, and held it out. For you, she said. You're the strongest woman I've ever met. Emily blinked. The girl looked at her with solemn certainty, the kind only children could hold without awkwardness. Emily didn't know what to say. She took the flower with both hands like it was something sacred. Thank you, she whispered. That night, Emily tucked the marigold in a small ceramic vase on her nightstand. Right beside it, she placed the folded letter Margaret had written all those months ago now, worn at the creases, but still whole. If you ever need peace, come. There's always tea and flowers waiting. She stared at the two items for a long time, the old invitation and the new gift. One had been her lifeline. The other a quiet recognition that she'd built something worthy from the wreckage. Emily thought of how far her hands had come. Once they were dismissed. Hired hands, Dean had called them, tools to lift, to carry, to disappear behind someone else's spotlight. Now, they created. They planted, healed, soothed, rebuilt. They had pulled her from the depths of someone else's legacy and rooted her in her own. The marigold wilted after a few days as flowers do, but Emily kept it pressed between pages of an old gardening book on the shop's back shelf. Not to preserve its color, but to remember what it had meant in that moment. She no longer needed to prove her worth. She'd already lived it, bloomed it, passed it on. Autumn arrived slow and golden, touching everything in amber. The fields softened, the blooms thinned. Customers still came, but with quiet questions, now requests for calm teas, grief blends, tinctures for changing seasons. The storefront breathed with them. Emily sat behind the register one morning with a cup of nettle and mint. Her fingers ached more these days. Not sharply, just enough to remind her of the limits. She didn't fight them. She adapted. Margaret had always said, don't push the season. Plant what thrives in the one you're in. The bell above the door chimed. A teenage boy entered, looking around like he wasn't sure he belonged. His jacket sleeves were too short. He held a single crumpled dollar. I saw your post, he said, glancing at the bulletin board. You're hiring part-time. Emily nodded. We are. I can lift things. I don't talk much, but I'm good at showing up. She smiled gently. That's more than enough. Later that afternoon, she was restocking the rosemary when Michael stepped in from the porch. We're going to have to build more shelving, he said, holding up a new box of handmade soaps. Emily nodded, tying the last bundle. Let's make them lower. Easier to reach for everyone. The hands that once wiped down counters without thanks, that carried laundry baskets up creaky stairs, that signed away a house with trust and exhaustion. Those same hands now arranged flowers in the window of a store she'd built from pain and peace alike. That evening, back at the cottage, she lit a candle made from her first beeswax batch and opened the gardening book. The marigold was still there, pressed flat, but vivid, nestled beside Margaret's letter. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Outside, the porch light flickered on. Anna and her daughter were laughing near the fence. Someone had brought a pie. The kettle whistled softly in the kitchen. Emily stood and opened the window. She breathed in the smell of earth, of wood smoke, of things that stayed. Not everyone who raised you will deserve your loyalty. Not everyone who shares your name will honor your worth. But sometimes, if you're lucky, the ones who show up later, the ones who ask nothing, who hand you marigolds, who offer help without expectation, become the truest kind of family. She looked down at her hands. They were calloused, imperfect, and tired, but they were hers, and they had built something no one could take.